English translation, 212th contact, Thursday, 6th of November, 1986, 01.04 hours.
I concerned myself in detail around the clarification of your question regarding the authenticity of the biblical books. In this regard, I also asked our historians and worked through all the historical records that were placed at my disposal. It became entirely perceptible that all the biblical books were not written in a single instance by those persons to whom they are ascribed. So it is also incorrect that the Gospel of Luke and the Acts of the Apostles come from Luke, and furthermore, the book of Job was not written by this man himself. Both books of the Bible are based on what was written down at a later time, as well as various books of the New Testament. Moreover, the letters that are listed in the New Testament also were not written by those to whom they are assigned. In truth, these were illiterates, who let their scribes write the letters, to whom they had to pay remunerations. Thus, one who was dictating a letter also could not control what the scribe wrote down, whereby it escaped the one dictating that very many things were falsified. This also applies to the fantastic stories that surround Paul, who, in his consciousness confusion, saw himself as a martyr and, thus, also lived and worked accordingly, and following this, he then ultimately died by assassins, as this also happened with Moses, who made many enemies within his own ranks, who then robbed him of his life.
So, it actually is not like what I said on the 11th of June, when I thought that Luke was the writer of the Gospel of Luke and of the Acts of the Apostles. Yes, Svath already said that Luke could neither write nor read, as this should have also been true of the others who are praised as Bible and New Testament writers. But what about the Gospel of Matthew? Were you also able to clarify this?
I was also able to do that, yes. Matthew was just as ignorant of reading and writing as all the others to whom the Gospels and the books of the Bible are attributed. The Gospel of Matthew was dictated by Matthew to a scribe named Joshua, who interpreted the whole thing in his free discretion and wrote it down, and consequently also falsified it.
Does one know the reason, then, why all the books and letters are, nevertheless, attributed to the disciples and evangelists and prophets?
It should be noted that out of Emmanuel's disciples, only Judas Iscariot was actually acquainted with reading and writing. For he was, which no one knew, and therefore which also was not handed down, a scribe, who left his profession, however, and became a follower of Emmanuel. As a result of many years of investigations, which were also carried out by our scientists and historians through time travels, it is to be explained that already during the outset of the origin of Christianity, the disciples and evangelists were anxious to give the impression that they were experts of reading and writing, and, thus, more highly educated than the common people. This was because the simple persons among the people were of the erroneous view that those who were more highly educated than others would just know and understand more and, consequently, would also be enabled and authorized to teach the more unknowing and uneducated people. An erroneous evil that has survived on the earth to the current day among all nations of the earth, which is also why the humans of today's time are still of this misconception. Through this, like at that time, the humans are title-believing and office-believing, and they let themselves be suppressed, exploited, or just held down by those who have a rank and a reputation, and who occupy an office. So even today it is likewise as in the time of Emmanuel and of the old prophets. And precisely of these, it remains to be said that not one of them has written down his offered teachings or his history. Indeed, this was done by others, even the scribes who were instructed to do so. The first Torah originated from this, but it was later destroyed up to the last letter by a major fire, and consequently there were no more written records, and everything was just handed down by word of mouth over generations. Needless to say, the consequence of this was that enormously many falsifications arose, until one day 12 self-proclaimed prophets, out of their own grace, gathered a large number of scribes around themselves, and went out with these into an outlying area, where they lived for 40 days in austere form and, during this time, wrote down 240 books, from which then, over time, the new Torah emerged, from which then also the Bible of Christianity emerged, to which the New Testament was then simply added.
But in addition, it must be said, so that no misunderstandings arise, that on the one hand, every one of the so-called prophets told his scribe those things and stories in the manner he had received them from the various sources. Also, it must be made clear that the so-called books cannot be compared to today's books, which often contain several hundred pages. Most of the books of the self-proclaimed prophets, their writing experts, and thus their scribes, only contained a few pages, apart from the books of Moses and some others. But of these books, the majority vanished again. Consequently, today, to my knowledge, only 33 of these are available in the Bible. As I have learned, in the Old Testament scriptures, one will first notice Moses, Joshua, and Judges, Ruth, and 2 of Samuel, 2 of Kings, Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, with Esther, these as history books. Then, as poetic books, there are Job, Psalms, then the Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Solomon. These are followed by the prophetic books, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, then Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, followed by Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, along with Haggai, Zechariah, and finally Malachi.
And you can still enumerate all this from your memory?
What is learned is learned. But slowly, my memory becomes overstocked with debris. But for the time being, it still works. So I still know the books of the New Testament. These go in such a way, so the history books, in the New, there stands Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, together with the Acts of the Apostles. The letters are listed as follows. Then the Romans, 2 Corinthians, Galatians and Ephesians, Philippians and Colossians, both Thessalonians, Timothy and Titus, Philemon, 2 of Peter, 3 of John, Hebrews, James, and the letter of Jude. Then comes the prophetic book. Finally, Revelation closes the whole Bible. Person, use what you read to the blessing, not to the curse.
Truly remarkable.
What I particularly like about it is the conclusion. If only the humans would maintain their thoughts and feelings in this manner, and then act accordingly. But for the majority of humanity, this seems to be a hurdle that will still need thousands of years to be mastered.
Unfortunately, a true word. And when I think of the coming terrible events of the future, then your words contain a very sad truth. The Earth humans will still cry out in the coming years when the 2B note, Bush, as father and son, take over the presidency in America, as I have told you. Both of them will be inhuman warmongers and will cause contempt for human life and evil acts of war to be spread into the wide world. In their self-glorification and vindictiveness, and in their lust for power, thereby stirring up terrorism throughout the world, but they will also exert themselves under the guise of peacemaking. In truth, they will indulge themselves in a form of terrorism, like earthly humanity has never seen or experienced before. Their terrorism will encounter foreign countries in a warlike manner, and will demand many thousands of human lives. But revenge for this will not be missing. For in evil acts of terrorism, they will be encountered by foreign extremist powers in their own country, whereby also thousands will lose their lives, particularly through an act of evil, when the Americans, in their great pride, are encountered by aircraft that are repurposed as destructive and thousand-fold deadly weapons.
You mean what will happen with respect to the WTC, as you told me in confidence, an event that will arrive in about 15 years? Do you mean that?
That is of correctness. About that, you should release no information.
I also will not. But you also said that the ruler of Israel will act in the same manner at that time, but also the Palestinians. What is the name of the guy again, who will have the helm in hand at that time in Israel? Did you not mention the name Sharon or so?
That is of correctness. His name will be Sharon. He is a man who is now already a talking point and who will arrange extremely much suffering, grief, hatred, destruction, and misery of all kinds, in regards to the spreading of murder and death, and regarding Palestinian, Arabic, and Islamic hatred. His route will be destruction and death, as this will also be the case with the two BDs in the USA. He will cause very much destruction, and his murderous orders and commands will demand a lot of human lives, whereby targeted murders of particular well-known enemies of Israel will also belong to the agenda, as well as the rising hatred and terrorism of the Palestinians and the extreme Arabic and Islamic groups, whereby all Arabs and Muslims will be falsely condemned around the world as extremists, fundamentalists, and terrorists by many false-thinking ones. Thus, Sharon, already soon after taking office, will act just as infamously and inhumanely and in a human life-despising manner as the father and son Bushes will act as presidents of the USA. But as I explained, the extremist, terrorist, and other irresponsible elements of the Palestinian people will also act the same, through which also Israeli women and children will innocently lose their lives, just like many men, and this will happen by the criminal machinations of Sharon and the two Bushes. Palestinian suicide bombers will belong to the agenda, as well as murderous attacks on innocent ones by the fundamentalists and extreme terrorists, who will soon drive their nuisance worldwide, often under the command of the insane and dissenter-hating, derelict fanatics and fundamentalists of the Islamic faith. It will first be Saddam Hussein, the Iraqi president and dictator, who will cause Father Bush to release the so-called Gulf War. After that, it will be the fanatic terrorist Osama bin Laden, an Arab who will drive his terrorism from Afghanistan in worldwide form, which will then cause Bush's son, of course always under the guise of peacekeeping and the fight against terrorism, to invade Afghanistan and destructively level the cities, etc., to the ground. Ultimately, in the worst case, everything can degenerate into a global war. And this time, the Americans would basically be to blame for this, if it should actually come to this as a result of the lust for might, unreasonableness, and irresponsibility of the American mighty ones. Only the world leaders and peoples of the earth can counter this insanity. If they let reason prevail and bring those power-hungry megalomaniacs to reason, on which the welfare and woes of the earth and the entire world population will depend. But unfortunately, at least during the first period, it will be such that other irresponsible national leaders and presidents, etc., will also shake hands with the criminal actions of Sharon and the two Bushes, whereby all those of the population of these countries who do not agree absolutely with the conduct of their irresponsible governments will innocently fall into the terrorists' line of fire.
This can indeed become cheerful. You asked me not to share any information about this. Now, I can reassure you, because for now I will certainly not do that, at least not publicly. Internally, I may certainly say something, right?
Among those whom you can trust, yes. But outwardly you must at least still wait.
I will do so. But now, I would like to address you about Mars again, because during our last conversation relating to this, I forgot a question that I still wanted to ask. Ptah told me on the Great Journey that there are also ongoing climate changes on Mars. That is how I remember it anyhow. Is that actually right?
Yes, that is of correctness. On Mars, there are ongoing climate changes and, therefore, also planetary climatic variations, through which, for example, snow falls. Although this phenomenon has a different nature than the one on Earth, because it consists partly of carbon dioxide.
Yes, exactly. Pa said that too. But what do you know about global warming? Is this actually to be solely attributed to the environmental degradation, etc. of the person?
Global warming is not just an effect of the environmental and atmospheric pollution caused by the Earth humans. The greenhouse effect, in the rotating form of pollution, is also to be attributed to special events and processes that occur on the Sun and whose effects also become noticeable on the Earth. Through this, not only are the atmospheric layers of the Earth warmed up, but also the atmospheres of all other planets in the Solar System. Moreover, the Earth, in its interior, generates great heat radiations, which penetrate to the outside and help with the greenhouse effect. The Earth's core, thus the center of the Earth, is not simply a solid mass, as is erroneously supposed by the earthly scientist. Rather, it is a core that is similar to what the Sun is in its entirety.
So it is a bubbling nuclear furnace.
That is a good comparison.
Then a question about Rembrandt. It is said over and over again that not all of the paintings attributed to him come from him. Do you know anything about this, since you still concern yourself with the earthly art of painting?
Around Rembrandt, whose real name was Rembrandt Harmens van Rijn, different stories grew, even during his own lifetime. He was born in Leiden on 15/7/1606, and he died in Amsterdam on 10/4/1669. Already at the youthful age of 15, he took painting lessons with the well-known history painter at the time, Jacob van Swanenburg, after which he gained further inspiration from various other painters, and from this developed his own painting direction and created various works in his typical fashion. In 1634, he married Saskia van Eilenburg, who already died, however, in 1642. She was a woman who was extremely talented in the art of painting. But she did not appear publicly with her ability, but only exercised it in secret, together with her husband, whose style fascinated her and whose style she adopted. In this form, she created quite a number of very good works, which were indistinguishable from those of her husband, and which also will not be distinguished for all times. She also made etchings in this manner, for which Rembrandt gave his name, as well as for the paintings made by his wife. So, for example, the alleged self-portrait of Rembrandt, the related etching of 1639, was not sketched by himself, as also several others were not, but by his wife, Saskia, who mastered his style perfectly. Also, concerning the double portrait with Saskia, only half of this comes from his art, for only the portrait of his wife traces back to his hand, while his portrait beside her is the work of his wife. In addition, there are various works that are imitations of Rembrandt's style, on the part of several of his students. Several have been recognized in modern times as such style imitations of expertise, but some of the surviving imitations are so perfect that they cannot be recognized as such. This especially applies to those works that trace back to Rembrandt's wife, because she mastered his style and technique perfectly. As an example, it is to be said that out of all existing Rembrandt etchings, only 178 of these trace back to his own art, while a further 111 must be attributed to his wife. All the rest trace back to imitations of students and counterfeiters. Concerning the alleged Rembrandt drawings, the number is still much higher. Also, the most diverse painted works, so the paintings that are attributed to Rembrandt do not truly trace back to him, but instead to his wife, Saskia, who lived in deep humility in relation to her great skill and left all the fame to her husband. Also, there are several imitations of his students, as well as obvious forgeries, but these are known as such.
Then another question regarding the engraved stones of Ica, which should have been excavated since the early 60s, namely in the desert of Ochuas in Peru, or in the vicinity of the provincial capital Ica. The figures engraved into the stones, so it is claimed, are supposed to have originated at least 100 million years ago, produced by people of a civilization of a very high level. Thus, the engravings show, for example, technological devices that nowadays find their use in optics and in surgery, etc. Even transplants are illustrated by the engravings, but also extinct prehistoric animals of various kinds. There are even engravings to be found on the stones that show human beings or human-like creatures on flying dinosaurs, etc. These matters became known at the beginning of the 70s. The stones were kept in Lima, in the Centro Aeronautico. But basically, more than 10,000 strange exhibits like this should be in the so-called Stone Library of a certain Dr. Javier Cabrera in Ica. Do you know what is going on with these engraved stones?
The whole thing is well known to me. The engraved stones are forgeries that trace back to a man named Basilio Ochuas, who engraved forms that he took from newspapers, magazines, and professional journals into the ancient stones. Ochuas was a grave robber who earned his living thereby, namely by desecrating old graves and stealing the grave goods, which he sold to tourists and collectors. Then, over time, also several family members helped the forger to engrave the stones, on the basis of the drawings that Basilio Ochuas had made from the newspapers and journals.
There still remains for me an important question. As you know, in the 60s, I got to know Yasser Arafat, whose temporary epithet was Abu Ammar. Concerning him, Sim Yasser once told me that he would become a great political talking point and play an important role as a president front man of the PLO, when everything starts to escalate between the Israelis and the Palestinians. What do you know about this? Have you made any predictions relating to this, and if so, may one get to know what was revealed?
Actually, according to our conditions, we should not talk about future things. Nevertheless, until now, we have done this over and over again.
I think that it was not forbidden, but only recommended, right?
That is of correctness.
Then we can still discuss certain aspects of the future.
That is also of correctness, for a silence over such things was actually just a recommendation in the event that you could publicly talk about it in advance. But on the other hand, one also spoke of the fact that predicting for the earth human bears no fruit because, despite the warnings of the evil events of the future, they continue in their old style.
And since I remain silent for the time being, you can probably tell me what you know and what your future viewings have shown.
That I can. Well then listen. Yasser Arafat has always made a secret of his real full name, which is why there are at least 3 different versions of a relevant form. First, there is the name Yasser Muhammad Arafat, then the name Rahman Abdul Rauf Arafat al-Qudwa al-Husseini, and then the name Muhammad Abdul Rauf Arafat. On the one hand, he maintained that he had been born on the 27th of August, 1928 in Jerusalem, but on the other hand, he claims to have seen the light of the world in Cairo. His political career is remarkable. As a true engineer, he became the founder and leader of the guerrilla organization Al-Fatah in 1958. A few years after your acquaintance with him, he became chairman of the PLO Central Committee in 1969. In the coming time, he will take on secret negotiations with representatives of Israel, through which he will then make it that the Palestinians receive a limited autonomy in Jericho and in the Gaza Strip, which might happen in September of 1993. Through his efforts, he will also receive the Nobel Peace Prize in 1994, after which he will then be elected as President of the Autonomous Territories of Palestine in 1996. In this office, it will be very difficult for him because he will have to deal with the opposition of radical Palestinian and Arab forces, especially with the Hamas and the Islamic Jihad organization. However, he will not actually be the right man for the office of Palestinian president because, out of fear of the radical Palestinian and Arab forces, he will be driven to spread their terrorism by suicide bombers in Israel and to spread more and more death and terror. This will get out of control to a great extent because Yasser Arafat and his security forces will stand by, idly or only very laxly, do something about the fact that Israel will take the toughest measures and destroy many facilities of the Palestinians with rockets and bombs, as well as with tanks, whereby also many human lives will be demanded, both guilty and innocent alike. Matching the Americans, Israel will strike them without mercy, but also the Palestinian terrorists will likewise do this. In contrast to the Palestinians, the Israelis will be able to count on the aid of America and of many misled people of many countries, while the Palestinians will only have a few Arabic states behind them. But on the whole, it must be said that the one like the other is addicted to false actions and to murderous, inhuman, inhumane, life criminal, and human criminal actions and deeds, as this will be the case with the autocratic Americans who, more and more, want to take on the role of a powerful, merciless, and irresponsible world police force and, at the same time, tread on the dignity of human beings in the manner described, like with a large foot, according to the principle, if you do not want to be my slave, then I will beat your brains out, like you always say.
Then, in the end, Arafat will not be able to prevail, whereby then, perhaps, the prophesied war in Palestine and Israel will arise, with which the people should wade ankle-deep in human blood.
That is of correctness. This possibility will be given. Therefore, it will also just depend on the common sense of the nations and world leaders to prevent the insanity of the war. But if nothing is done and if nothing is said against the Israelis and against the Palestinian extremist radical forces and Arab fanatics and against their murderous, degenerate, and hate-filled craft, then the danger of the fulfillment of the prophecies will be very great.
Unfortunately, the Earth humans do not let themselves be taught by reason and logic. Reason and logic make no difference to them, as also real love and brotherly love, as responsibility, peace, freedom, harmony, and equalizedness. Even in families, all these high values are disowned, and everything that should be treated with dignity and respect is despised and abused. Parents beat their children, as also husbands beat up their wives, or wives maltreat their husbands. And just as this happens in many families or in other human communities, it also occurs in the workplaces, where hatred, envy, and harassment often cause the greatest misery.
This likewise applies to economic life and,
of course, to politics, as well as to religious centers, like in monasteries and sects. where the monks or believers conduct themselves hypocritically among one another, with the superiors constantly trying to gain advantages for themselves and presuming themselves as better than their fellow men, fellow believers, and fellow monks, etc. And if one observes Israel and Palestine as well as America and Arabia in particular, it is alarming to note that the extremists, fanatics, radicals, fundamentalists, and degenerated nationalists of these countries are crazy, insane, unscrupulous, and poor in consciousness creatures, to whom a human life is not even worth the speck of a fly. I became acquainted with many of these unscrupulous madmen when I joined a large group as a freedom fighter, in order to search for a killer who had brutally murdered my fiancé and delivered him to justice.
This and many other things from your life are well known to me. I am sorry for the many events and pains that you had to let yourself go through. But you have led a remarkably adventurous life, so it was inevitable that such incidents happened on your way. You have grown from this, however, and thereby acquired the capacity to pursue a goal once set by you for so long until you reached it. You have acquired such perseverance and steadfastness through which you alone can fulfill your mission. This entirely apart from your knowledge in reference to the teaching of the Spirit, aka creation energy teaching. I can say this now because through my own investigations, I encountered extremely interesting things that concern you and all your previous personalities in past lives, namely, back to Enoch's time. But do not worry that I speak of this because I know that for the time being, everything must remain a mystery, at least to your group members and the public. Ptah will be the first one who will talk openly about this when he personally comes in contact with you again in a public manner. But from now on, you no longer need to appear so ignorant towards me, as you have always done this until now, because I now know very well that, at least in terms of the teaching of the Spirit and all related matters, you are more knowledgeable than me and even Ptah and our spirit leaders, whom you will approach in later years when your health has improved again, in order for them to receive specific instructions from you.
Aha, there, you also gave a prediction. So according to your words, I will come out of my poor health situation and will then be able to work properly again.
That is only partly true, for your health will probably make very encouraging progress, but you will no longer be able to live without a greater amount of medication, which you must take twice a day. Also, your health will no longer be the same as before, because certain consequences will remain that can no longer be remedied. You also will not be able to perform any hard manual labor, which is why you will have to limit yourself to writing, office and administrative work, and in teaching. Also, with regard to power tools, no opportunity of working in a manual manner is given to you anymore, not just for now, but also for all future time of your present life. But this also has something good in itself, because now you can finally just devote yourself to your real mission, and you can do all those written works that are related to your task.
Thank you for your remarks. I do not like it that I can no longer chop, dig, pave, plant, plow, harrow, drive tractor, and so on. But on the other hand, it is also good that I can finally devote myself to all those written and oral works, etc., that had to be neglected by me until now, due to all the construction work at the center.
That, my friend, should be enough for today. I am going now, but I will visit you again on the 2nd of December. Farewell until then.
Take care, Quetzal. Thanks for your visit and all the information. Goodbye.